The dusty trail stretched before Xavier Caldwell like the promise of a new beginning, but the blood staining his hands told a different story. It was 1876, and the frontier offered both escape and judgment in equal measure. He had spent 3 years trying to outrun his past, but some ghosts ride faster than any horse. Xavier adjusted his worn Stetson and squinted against the setting New Mexico sun. The small town of Copper Ridge appeared on the horizon, its weathered buildings seeming to rise from the desert floor like scattered tombstones. His canteen ran dry 2 days back, and his mount needed rest as badly as he did. This would be a quick stop: water, supplies, and back to the trail before anyone recognized him. The main street was quiet as he rode in, just a few locals milling about outside the general store. Xavier kept his head down, years of caution becoming second nature. The saloon stood at the far end of town, its faded signs swinging in the evening breeze. It was as good a place as any to gather information and maybe earn a few dollars at the card tables. He tied his horse at the hitching post, patting the animal's neck. "Won't be long, Flint," he murmured, checking his revolver from habit before stepping through the batwing doors. The interior was hazy with tobacco smoke and filled with the sounds of clinking glasses and muffled conversations. Xavier made his way to the bar, ordered whiskey, and scanned the room with practiced subtlety. That's when he saw her. Cassandra James stood at the far end of the bar, wearing a simple blue dress that somehow outshone the gaudy attire of the saloon girls. Her auburn hair was pinned back, revealing a face that belonged in a painting rather than this dusty frontier outpost. She was arguing quietly but intensely with the barkeep, who kept shaking his head. "I told you, Miss James, I can't extend any more credit," the barman said, loud enough for Xavier to overhear. "Your father's debts aren't my concern." "Please, Mr. Henley," she replied, her voice steady despite the desperation in her eyes. "Just until the end of the month." "The cattle sale we both know there won't be any cattle sale," Henley interrupted. "Not with the James ranch in the state it's in." Xavier found himself moving closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. "Perhaps I could be of assistance," he said, immediately wondering why he'd spoken at all. Cassandra turned, startled by his intrusion. Up close, her eyes were a striking green, currently narrowed with suspicion. "I don't need charity, sir," she said firmly. Xavier nodded respectfully. "Not offering any, madam. Just thought I might have a business proposition," the barkeep snorted. "Don't waste your time, stranger. The James place is cursed ever since old man James passed. Nothing but bad luck and bandits." Cassandra's cheeks flushed. "My father built that ranch from nothing, and I intend to honor his legacy." She turned to Xavier. "If you'll excuse me." She gathered her shawl and headed for the door, dignity intact despite the whispers that followed her. Xavier finished his drink in one swallow and followed, catching up to her on the boardwalk outside. "Miss James," he called, "I meant no disrespect back there." She paused, regarding him with wary eyes. "What do you want, Mr. Caldwell?" "Xavier Caldwell, and I'm looking for work." Cassandra laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Then you've approached the wrong person. I can barely keep my existing hands paid." "I'm good with cattle and better with a gun," Xavier said, "and I don't need much pay, just meals and a place to bunk." She studied him for a long moment. "Why would you work for nearly nothing?" Xavier considered his answer carefully. The truth that he needed a place to disappear for a while wouldn't inspire confidence. "Sometimes a man just needs purpose more than money," he said instead. Something in his words seemed to reach her. "The ranch is 5 miles west of town. If you're still interested, come by tomorrow morning." She turned to leave, then added, "I can't promise anything beyond a meal for your trouble." "I'll be there," Xavier replied, watching her walk away, wondering what had possessed him to volunteer for a losing battle. Yet something about Cassandra James stirred a part of him he thought had died long ago. The next morning found Xavier riding up to the James ranch as the sun crested the distant mountains. The property had clearly seen better days. The fences needed mending, the barn roof sagged, and the main house desperately needed paint. But the land itself was good ample grazing, a creek running through it, and natural boundaries that would make it easier to manage a herd. Cassandra emerged from the house as he approached, wearing men's trousers and a work shirt, her hair braided down her back. Two ranch hands stood nearby, eyeing Xavier with undisguised suspicion. "You came," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Said I would," Xavier replied, dismounting. "This is Tom Riley," she gestured to an older man with a weathered face, and Lee Porter, a younger man with a wiry build. "They're all that's left of my father's crew." After brief introductions, Cassandra led Xavier on a tour of the ranch, explaining the situation as they walked. Her father had died 6 months earlier, leaving her with mounting debts and dwindling prospects. The local cattle baron, Victor Hartwell, had been systematically cutting her off, intimidating potential buyers, hiring away her ranch hands, and making it clear he wanted her land. "Why not sell?" Xavier asked, watching her face carefully. "This land was my father's dream," she replied, her jaw set firmly. "He came here with nothing, built something real. I won't dishonor his memory by giving up." She paused, looking across the valley. "Besides, Victor Hartwell is a bully who thinks he can take whatever he wants." "I refuse to let him win." Xavier nodded, understanding pride and principle. He'd held on to both, even when they'd cost him dearly. "We've got about 50 head left," she continued. "If we can get them to market in Tucson next month, I might save the ranch." "But Hartwell's men have been rustling a few head every week." "And the law," Cassandra laughed bitterly. "Sheriff Pierce, he's in Hartwell's pocket, claims he can't find any evidence despite the Hartwell brand appearing on my cattle." Xavier removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Seems like you've got more troubles than one drifter can fix, Miss James." "I told you I couldn't offer much," she said sharply, then softened. "But I appreciate you listening. Few in town will even do that anymore." Something about her determination reached into Xavier's chest and took hold. "I didn't say I was leaving, just noting the odds." For the first time, she smiled a genuine smile that transformed her face and made Xavier momentarily forget the danger that followed him. "I've never much cared for odds, Mr. Caldwell." The next 2 weeks established a rhythm. Xavier rose before dawn, working alongside Tom and Illy to repair fences, tend the cattle, and keep watch for rustlers. Cassandra worked as hard as any of them, her hands calloused from labor but still somehow graceful. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, planning strategies to save the ranch. Xavier learned that Cassandra had been educated back east, returning only when her father fell ill. She spoke of books and ideas with a passion that matched her determination to save her home. He found himself sharing more than he intended stories of places he'd seen, though carefully edited to hide the reasons for his wandering. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson, Cassandra asked the question he'd been dreading. "What are you running from, Xavier?" He stiffened, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. "Everyone in these parts is running from something," she added quickly. "I'm not judging, just curious about the man who's risking his life for a stranger's ranch." Xavier stared into the distance. "3 years ago, I killed a man in Texas," he said finally, the words feeling strange after so long holding them inside. "He deserved it, caught him rustling cattle, and he drew on me first, but his brothers were powerful men. They put a price on my head and twisted the truth to make me a murderer in the eyes of the law." He expected fear or disgust, but found only thoughtful consideration in her gaze. "Is that why you've been sleeping in the barn instead of the bunkhouse? Easier escape route?" Xavier nodded, surprised by her perception. "Well," she said after a moment, "we all have ghosts, Mr. Caldwell. Mine just happened to be buried in the cemetery over that ridge." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "I trust you to keep your demons from destroying what's left of my ranch. The rest is between you and whatever God you answer to." With that, she left him on the porch, more affected by her acceptance than he cared to admit. The peace couldn't last. 3 nights later, Xavier was awakened by the sound of hooves. He grabbed his gun and moved silently to the barn door. In the moonlight, he could make out 5 riders approaching the cattle pen. He whistled a signal he'd arranged with Tom and Illy and moved into position. The rustlers were working quickly, already separating several cattle from the herd. "That's far enough," Xavier called out, his gun steady. "Those aren't your cattle to take." The rustlers froze, then the leader laughed. "Well now, boys, looks like Miss James found herself a new guard dog." He turned toward Xavier, his face hidden by a bandana. "Run along, stranger, this ain't your fight." "I'm making it my fight," Xavier replied. "Now ride out before this gets messy." The standoff might have ended there, but a shot rang out from the house. Cassandra stood on the porch, rifle in hand, having fired into the air. "Next one won't be a warning," she called. The distraction was all the rustlers needed. One fired at Xavier, forcing him to dive for cover. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Xavier returned fire, hearing Tom and Ali join the fight from their positions. When the shooting stopped, the rustlers were gone, but they'd managed to drive off a dozen cattle. Worse, Ali lay clutching his leg, blood seeping between his fingers. "Damn it," Xavier muttered, helping Cassandra tend to the young ranch hand. "We need to get him to a doctor." "Nearest one's in town," Tom said, applying pressure to Ali's wound. "I'll take him," Xavier decided. "Tom, you and Miss James secure the remaining cattle." Cassandra nodded grimly. "Be careful in town. If these were Hartwell's men, he'll know you're coming." Xavier loaded the injured man onto a wagon and set off for Copper Ridge, his mind racing. The ranch was more vulnerable than ever, and Hartwell was growing bolder. Something had to change, or Cassandra would lose everything. The town doctor treated Ali's wound a clean shot through the muscle, painful but not life-threatening, and Xavier paid with money he'd been saving for emergencies. As he helped Ali back to the wagon, a familiar voice stopped him cold. Well, if it ain't Xavier Caldwell." Xavier turned slowly to face Martin Reeves, a bounty hunter he'd encountered twice before. Reeves leaned against a hitching post, casually cleaning his fingernails with a knife. "Not looking for trouble, Reeves," Xavier said evenly, aware of Ali watching with confusion. "Trouble found you anyway," Reeves smiled unpleasantly. "Price on your head's up to $500, dead or alive, though I'm thinking dead might be easier." Xavier kept his voice steady. "We both know I didn't murder that rancher. It was self-defense." "Courts didn't see it that way," Reeves shrugged. "Besides, $500 spends the same either way." Xavier glanced around the street, gauging distances and angles. "There's an injured man here. Let me get him back to the ranch and you and I can settle this properly." Reeves considered, then nodded. "You got until sundown tomorrow, then I'm coming for you, Caldwell, and I ain't alone." He gestured subtly toward the saloon, where two hard-looking men watched from the boardwalk. Xavier helped Ali into the wagon and drove out of town, his mind made up. He couldn't bring this danger to Cassandra's door. When they reached the ranch, he'd gather his things and ride out, drawing Reeves and his men away. But when they arrived, Cassandra met them with news that changed everything. "Hartwell's men were here again," she said, her face tight with anger. "They left this." She handed Xavier a crumpled note. The message was simple: sell the ranch by the end of the week or they'd burn it to the ground with everyone inside. "I'm not selling," Cassandra stated flatly, anticipating his suggestion. "This is my home." Xavier looked at her determined face, then at Tom helping Ali from the wagon, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging, of having something worth fighting for. "There's something you should know," he said, and told her about Reeves. Cassandra listened without interruption, then said, "So we have bounty hunters coming from one direction and Hartwell's thugs from another." "Yes," Xavier confirmed, "which is why I need to leave, draw them away from here." "No," she said firmly, "we stand together, all of us." She looked to Tom and Ali, who nodded in agreement. "They'll kill you," Xavier argued. "Hartwell wants the land, not a war, but Reeves won't stop until I'm dead or captured." Cassandra stepped closer, her green eyes fierce. "My father taught me that some things are worth dying for, Xavier. This land, my freedom to choose my own path, those things matter, and so do you." The unexpected declaration hung between them, neither willing to look away first. "I can't let you risk your life for me," Xavier finally said, his voice rough. "Seems to me you've been risking yours for me since the day we met," she countered. "Besides, I have a plan." Her strategy was audacious and dangerous, but with few options left, they prepared through the night. Messages were sent, positions fortified, and by dawn, the James Ranch was as ready as it could be. They didn't have to wait long. Shortly after noon, dust on the horizon announced approaching riders Hartwell himself, accompanied by 6 gunmen. They stopped at the edge of the property, just out of rifle range. "Miss James," Hartwell called out, a portly man with expensive clothes and cold eyes. "I've brought the deed for you to sign. Be reasonable now." Cassandra stepped onto the porch, Xavier slightly behind her with his hand near his gun. "The answer is still no, Mr. Hartwell," she replied clearly. "This land isn't for sale." Hartwell's face darkened. "I've been patient, girl. That patience has ended." He gestured and his men spread out, preparing to advance. "I wouldn't," Xavier called. "The property's well defended." Hartwell squinted at him. "You're outnumbered, Cowboy. 1 drifter and a woman won't stop us." "Maybe not," came a new voice as Sheriff Pierce rode up with 3 deputies. "But the law might have something to say." Hartwell turned in surprise. "Pierce, what are you doing here?" The sheriff dismounted slowly. "Got an interesting letter this morning. Seems Miss James has evidence of your rustling operations. Signed affidavits from former employees, records of cattle sales with altered brands." He pulled out papers. "Mighty convincing evidence." "That's absurd," Hartwell blustered, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Maybe so," Pierce conceded, "but the federal marshal arriving tomorrow might see it differently. Wire came yesterday he's investigating land fraud throughout the territory." Hartwell's face paled. He glared at Cassandra. "You're bluffing." "Try me," she replied calmly. "Or ride away now, leave my ranch alone, and we'll see if these documents mysteriously disappear before the marshal arrives." The standoff stretched for several tense moments before Hartwell finally nodded curtly. "This isn't over, James." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following reluctantly. Sheriff Pierce approached the porch. "That should keep him off your back for a while, Miss James, though I'd appreciate having those documents you mentioned." Cassandra smiled. "Of course, Sheriff. I'll have them ready when you return." It was a bluff. They'd devised no such documents existed, but the threat would keep Hartwell cautious. Pierce tipped his hat and left with his deputies, leaving Xavier to stare at Cassandra in amazement. "That was impressive," he admitted. "But Reeves is still coming, and he won't be scared off by bluffs about paperwork." "One problem at a time," she said, touching his arm gently. "We've bought ourselves space to breathe." That space was short-lived. As the sun began its descent, Reeves and his 2 companions appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. They rode down slowly, confidently, stopping at the edge of the yard. "Time's up, Caldwell," Reeves called out. "Come on out and face your judgment." Xavier stepped onto the porch, keeping Cassandra behind him. "There are innocent people here, Reeves. This is between you and me." Reeves laughed. "Should have thought of that before you hid behind a woman's skirts. Now everyone here's involved." His companions drew their guns, aiming at the house. Xavier felt cold rage building inside him. These men threatened not just his life, but Cassandra's, and that was something he couldn't allow. "I'll make you a deal," he called, stepping off the porch into the yard. "I'll trade you my life for hers. Let the others go, and I'll come quietly." The outlaws laughed until they saw his draw. Xavier's hand moved with preternatural speed, his gun clearing its holster before they could blink. His first shot caught Reeves's right-hand man in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The second disarmed the other companion. Reeves, however, was just as fast. Both men fired simultaneously. Xavier felt the burn as a bullet grazed his side, but his own shot was true, hitting Reeves in the chest. The bounty hunter looked down at the spreading red stain with disbelief. "Always knew." "You were faster," he gasped before toppling from his horse. The remaining bounty hunter raised his hands in surrender. "Don't shoot, I'm done." The sudden silence was deafening. Xavier holstered his gun and turned to find Cassandra rushing toward him, her face pale with worry. "You're hit," she said, examining the wound at his side. "It's nothing," he assured her, though the pain was intensifying. "Just a graze." Tom and Ali emerged from their positions, weapons ready, but the threat had passed. The surviving bounty hunter helped his wounded companion onto a horse, eager to depart. "Wait," Xavier called to them. "Tell whoever sent you that Xavier Caldwell died here today. Understand, as far as anyone knows, I'm dead and buried." The men nodded frantically, then fled, leaving Reeves's body in the dust. Cassandra led Xavier inside to tend his wound. As she cleaned and bandaged his side, her hands gentle but sure, she asked, "Did you mean what you said about trading your life for mine?" Xavier met her eyes. "Yes." "Why?" She pressed, her fingers pausing on his skin. "Because in these few weeks, you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever," he admitted. "A reason to stop running, a home." He hesitated, then added softly, "Someone worth dying for." Cassandra's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want you to die for me, Xavier. I want you to live with me." She leaned forward, and their lips met in a kiss that seemed to stop time. When they finally parted, Xavier knew with absolute certainty that his wandering days were over. The next morning, they buried Reeves on the property, marking the grave with a simple wooden cross. Sheriff Pierce arrived to take their statement, accepting Xavier's version of events without much questioning. Whether from respect for Cassandra or indifference to a bounty hunter's fate, he seemed content to let the matter rest. "Far as I'm concerned," Pierce said as he prepared to leave, "Reeves came looking for trouble and found it. Case closed." He paused, studying Xavier. "Though it seems to me a man might want to make things official if he's planning to stay in one place." Xavier understood the sheriff's meaning. His past would always follow him unless he faced it directly. That evening, he sat with Cassandra on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I need to go to Texas," he said finally. "Clear my name properly." She nodded, taking his hand. "We'll go together." "It could be dangerous," he warned. "The Rowlands brothers won't give up easily." "I'm not afraid," Cassandra replied. "Besides, we have evidence now." She smiled at his confusion. "Reeves kept detailed notes. I found them in his saddlebags, including a confession from one of the witnesses who lied about what happened that day. Apparently, Reeves was thorough in his research." Xavier felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. That might be enough to convince a judge to reopen the case. "It will be," she said with confidence. "And when we return, we'll rebuild this ranch together." Their journey to Texas took 6 weeks. With Cassandra's determined support and the evidence from Reeves's notes, Xavier appeared before a judge in Austin. The hearing was brief but conclusive. The charges were dismissed, the bounty rescinded, and Xavier Caldwell was a free man for the first time in 3 years. They married in a small church in Austin the next day, unwilling to wait any longer to begin their life together. The return journey to New Mexico felt like a victory procession, each mile bringing them closer to the home they would build together. Spring came to the James Ranch, now the Caldwell Ranch, with promise and renewal. The cattle herd grew, the buildings were repaired, and new hands were hired. Victor Hartwell, facing federal investigation for land fraud, sold his holdings and left the territory, removing the final threat to their prosperity. One evening, a year after Xavier had first ridden into Copper Ridge, he and Cassandra stood on their porch, watching the sunset. Her hand rested on her growing belly, their first child due in the autumn. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Stopping here that day, all the danger it brought." Xavier pulled her close, marveling at how completely his life had transformed. "Not for a single moment," he answered truthfully. "Every choice, every risk, they all led me to you." Cassandra smiled up at him, her face illuminated by the fading sunlight. "When you offered to trade your life for mine that day, I knew I'd never love anyone the way I love you." "I would have done it," Xavier said solemnly. "But I'm grateful every day that I didn't have to." He placed his hand over hers on her belly. "This is a far better ending to our story." "Not an ending," Cassandra corrected gently, "just the beginning." As darkness settled over the land that was now truly their home, Xavier Caldwell embraced the woman who had given him redemption, purpose, and love. The past no longer haunted him, and the future stretched before them like the vast New Mexico sky filled with endless possibilities and the promise of a life well lived together.